Hi, everybody. Thank you for joining me in the locker room on this Wednesday, July 19th. I'm Alan Locher. One of the world's foremost psychic mediums, author and lecturer, John Edward, is here today to tell us what it has been like to help millions of people over the last 4 decades with his uncanny ability to predict future events and communicate with those who have crossed over to the other side. He will also share his and his mom's deep connection to guiding light. In 2000, John pioneered the psychic phenomenon genre with the television program Crossing Over with John Edward on the Syfy network. It was the first television show syndicated worldwide devoted to psychic mediumship, and it would go on to run for 4 seasons. John followed up the success of Crossing Over with another television program, John Edward Cross Country, which debuted on the WE network in 2006 and ran for 3 seasons. He is also the author of the critically acclaimed New York Times bestseller, One Last Time, Crossing Over, the stories behind the stories, What If God Were the Sun, Afterlife, Answers from the Other Side, Practical Praying, Using the Rosary to Enhance Your Life, Final Beginnings, Infinite Quest, and Fallen Masters, and the most recent, Above and Beyond. It is my pleasure to welcome John Edward to the locker room. It's been a long time. Hey, John.
How you doing? Thank you. And thank you for the intro. And nice to see you again. I'm so used to watching your interviews. It's kind of cool to be on. Thank you.
Well, I appreciate that. We both have that deep connection to guiding light.
Yes, mine goes back quite a few years. It goes back way, way, way back.
Same with me. As I was doing research, I realized we were both Libras and born. I'm a couple years older, but we were born a day apart.
So I'm the 19th.
And I'm the 18th. Libras are pretty good people.
I say it's the best sign in the zodiac, but I might be a little biased.
Me too. But I love that. I love it. And I really think last time we saw each other was like 13 or so years ago, over at the Guiding Light studio. But we'll come back to Springfield and your Guiding Light connection. But I'd love to go back to Long Island, your childhood.
Sure.
I understand you were obsessed with anything that had powers as a kid. Can you talk about?
Well, if you look right above the mantle, you'll see that there are 2 Genie Bottles.
I do. Oh my God, I love that.
So there are 2 Genie Bottles, and they are actual from geniebottles.com, like the only person that's authorized to actually sell them. They're like real replicas of the different seasons of I Dream of Genie. So I was a fan of Barbara Eden, and I was a fan of the show, and they're great gifts. I give these out as gifts all the time because they have such a nostalgia to that. When people get them, they're like, "Oh my God!" And it's the real actual bottle.
And I'm sure people who walk in your house are like, "Are you kidding?"
Yeah, everybody has to pick it up, and they go, "This is heavy." So it's a cool thing to have because it represents the symbolism of my childhood, because I used to be obsessed with that show as well. So I was obsessed with any type of superhero, Bionic Man, $6 Million Man, Bionic Woman, Wonder Woman. I mean, any powers, superheroes, all of that was I couldn't get enough.
I don't know if that's a Libra thing, but I really was too. Seriously. Bionic Woman, $6 Million Man, all of that, Wonder Woman.
I think it
was Bewitched.
Yeah, I think it was the time period growing up, but I also found myself fascinated when other shows would scratch the surface but never go into it. So on Saturday nights at 10 o'clock, we would watch Fantasy Island, and every now and again, Mr. Rourke would use his powers, but they were never really delved into. It was more rich people showed up on an island and had their lessons learned was the kind of the genesis of the show. But every now and again, Mr. Rourke would do his thing and be like, wait, that was different than last week. He's got powers. Does the island have powers? And then still to this day, I'm still fascinated by stuff. So Lost was one of my favorite TV shows as well. So, that was a show where I would watch week after week without any expectation, without reading into the show. People knew I was going to the island, leave me alone. And then for an hour, I would just kind of experience it. And I never tried to figure it out. I didn't get freaked out by the dangling things that were never addressed or answered. I just kind of went on the journey of experiencing it.
I love that. And it's interesting, you talk about that period of time. There was an overabundance during that time. We're talking Bewitched and Genie and 6 Million. Now there's some, spattered about, but not like it was.
No, and I think that whether it was a comedy back then that people were doing, or if it was done in a dramatic sense, it was done in a way that had to do, it was a reflection of the relationships on the show. It wasn't about the power. It was really about the people. Oh, and they had powers, right? So I
Mhm.
think that's the difference between the then and now. Now it's more about the superhero and the powers and less about the people or the relationship dynamics that might be associated.
Yeah, interesting, because you think about, yeah, Genie, it was about the relationships bewitched, and that's interesting. Yeah, they had powers as a side, you know,
Yep.
thing. Yeah, that's so true. Writing, everything's in the writing. Talk about Long Island University. What did you set out to study, and what did you think you were going to do with
So,
your career?
well, I really wasn't sure what I was going to do. Like as a kid, I really didn't have a great aspiration. My dad was a cop and would have loved for me to become a cop. And I was like, not cop material. That's not my thing. I had way more of a creative kind of a brain. I was way more into like piano and any type of creativity. I was not really sure. So then I wound up getting a job at a local deli, and I thought, food? Maybe I'll do food. So I thought I would kind of investigate maybe going to like the New York Culinary Institute or do something along those lines. And then I recognized that's not for me either. But it was watching Guiding Light. True, this is gonna sound crazy, but probably the best show to actually say this. I was watching Guiding Light, and I believe Maureen Reardon was a hospital administrator. And I
Yes.
was like, I want to do that. I want to go into hospital administration. So I was actually inspired by the show for my degree. My degree is a few credits short of healthcare and public administration. And I was in an accelerated master's program that I wound up dropping down to just get my bachelor's because my mom wound up getting lung cancer and getting sick. So when people ask me, like, how did you wind up going for like healthcare and public administration? I usually just say like, well, I wasn't sure if I wanted to be clinical or admin. I was gonna be like, well, Maureen Reader and Guiding Light. They'd be like, what? But that's pretty much how it happened.
And I assume it was Ellen Dolan who first. Were you watching Ellen first or Ellen Parker? Do you
Ellen,
remember?
I think it was Ellen Parker.
Ellen
I
Parker.
don't remember Ellen Dolan being the hospital administrator.
Yeah, she might not have been,
Yeah, I
but
remember.
trying to think, Maureen, if Ellen Parker was uh, Maureen Reardon, or did she come on as Maureen Bauer when they were already married? I don't remember, but
I don't
somebody
remember.
will tell me
I
that.
also remember thinking what was really cool about that is Rick Bauer was accepted into an accelerated like medical school program. So I was like, wait, this is a sign. I got accepted to the accelerated healthcare administration program. It's a sign.
That's so funny. But yeah, some magic in getting him through that program very fast.
Yeah, unfortunately, that did not work for me. Like I had to legitimately go through the program.
Seriously. At 15, you said that a psychic friend of your mother's gave you a reading that changed your life. Can you share,
So my
the
dad was
experience?
Yeah, my dad was a New York City cop, and he was a career military guy who did not really like the subject matter of anything metaphysical or psychic. So the general rule of thumb was make sure that he's not around any of that. Keep that away from him. There might have been some expletives that were connected to it during that period. But mom and dad divorced. I wound up moving into my grandma's house, which I spent most of my time there anyway. And they used to have psychics come to the house all the time. But because I didn't really, I guess, grow up around it, I didn't really believe in it. So even though I had an interest in powers, I didn't have an interest in the psychic stuff. And I had my dad in the back of my head, like, it's not real, that's not real, that type of thing. Well, then between 13 and 15, I encountered a lot of those folks coming to my grandmother's house. Kind of thought it was interesting and fascinating. I used to make fun of them. I used to pull apart their readings. And then at 15, my mom met a woman named Lydia Clark. And Lydia agreed to come to my grandmother's home to do readings under one condition. And that condition was she wanted to meet me. So it was a very different experience. Normally it would be like you can't be around. This time it was, you need to be around. So I said, why? Like, why do I need to be there? And she said, listen, this woman really has her own practice in Manhattan. She doesn't really do this. She doesn't like do house parties. She goes, but she'll do it if you're here. So I remember thinking like, wait, I'm like bait? Like I'm the bait for this? My mom's like, yeah, you're the bait. So long story short, I had a reading with her, and that reading put me on my path, and it changed my perspective, like really changed my perspective. Like she came out with information that was very accurate, very specific, very detailed, told me I had this ability, told me that I would be doing this, told me when I was 15 that I would be on television, radio, books. And I legitimately remember thinking this woman is batshit crazy. Like she could have told me that, she could fly, and I'd be like, oh, okay, great. But then it started to happen. And she came out with information at the very end of the reading that was uncomfortably private. And when I say uncomfortably private, it meant that my mother didn't know. And if my mother did know, it would be uncomfortably public. And I was like, oh, I have to lie to this woman right now. So I did. I completely was not forthcoming. And the woman, Lydia, proceeded to tell me what she was telling me. Anyway, when I left that, I was like, okay, wait, there's like no way possible this woman could have known that unless she's got something, So I was like, maybe she's like a mind reader or something. Well, what that did was it sent me on a journey of trying to figure out how to make sure nobody could ever do that to me again. Because I felt violated. I didn't feel like, wow, that was cool. I felt more like, oh, I don't like this. I don't like the way this feels. So that reading sent me to the public library where I did my research. And as I was researching psychic phenomena, and back then it was under the occult section, so I always say I was embarrassed to check the books out. I like sat on the public library floor and just read them there. I was like, wait, this isn't psychic. This is like normal. Like everybody does this. So I started to realize I'm not as maybe normal as I thought I was. And that was my journey. That's how I started.
Going to the library, sitting on the floor, is there one book you remember having a major impact out of all?
I can't tell you the book, but I could tell you that there was a paragraph in a book. And I had a very strong experience when my aunt took me to Puerto Rico. It was the only time I was actually on a cruise. It was a Carnival cruise, and one of the stops was Old San Juan. And when I got to Old San Juan, I had a past life experience, like a memory, like I was there before, and I knew stuff that had happened there, and I couldn't explain it. I was like 12 and a half, 13. So as a result of that experience and not being able to explain how I knew the things I knew, and remembering like I was there before, but I wasn't John. It was like that whole kind of weird, nebulous clarity. There was a book that was written like a decade before I was born, and they were talking about reincarnation and past life recall, where you could be in a place and have that experience. And I was like, oh my God. And I remember like reading the year it was written, and I was like, I wasn't even alive yet. I'm like, this is like mind-blowing stuff for me. And then I read about people like Jean Dixon and Madame Blavatsky from Russia, and Edgar Casey, and not Jean Dixon, clearly Nostradamus was in there. But then Carl Jung, and how people like Carl Jung and other psychologists had this whole other aspect of understanding energy and perspective on energy that had a parapsychology, paranormal bent to it that wasn't so highlighted. So that was like, wait, these are like degreed people that are talking about energy in a different way. So at a very young age, it shaped my experience, because I didn't come into it from a place of being a believer. I came into it from a place of being an explorer and seeking information. And I discovered people that were respectable people who were not poo-pooing it, but were talking about it in a different kind of way.
It's interesting because you had that visceral reaction to her reading you, which I would assume there are some people who you might give readings to who might have that same reaction to of
Yeah,
feeling violated. It can't be a singular John Edward experience. It must happen to others as well.
it does. But I think those people are looking for it where I wasn't looking for it. Like
That's true.
I went to prove to the rest of the people that she wouldn't be able to do it to me.
Right.
So
You were bait. So
yeah, but I was going to prove to them that I wasn't going to help her. Like I wasn't going to help her in any way.
Yeah.
So my whole thing was I was going to sit there and just,
Yeah.
and the ironic part is she just took my high school ring and looked down and never looked at me. She just talked. So there was no like looking at my facial expressions, my body language. She wasn't, it almost didn't matter. I was sitting there, to be quite honest. Like she just did her thing. So that was a little bit of a shell shocked moment for me. So when clients come to me, they're actually coming to me because they want me to do that for them.
Yeah, right. That makes sense. Absolutely. There's a fan that says, "Hi, John. Greetings from Australia. Seems we all were fans of people with superpowers. Continuing dramas. Marlena on Days and Alexis on Dynasty. You know,
That's cool. That's cool. That's very cool.
There are people who believe in what you do, people who want to believe, and people who are skeptical. How would you explain to somebody, how does it work for you, John Edward?
So I tell people that like 20% of the population don't have a belief system. They believe in nothing. 20% have a belief system and they believe in everything. And most people fall somewhere in between. And I always say that I want people to be skeptical. I want people to be open, but I think that specifically now, where we are on this planet in 2023, having this conversation with what's happening in the world, I think it is imperative for people to be critical thinkers. And just because somebody says that they're psychic, I don't really care if they have 5 million people following them on social media. That doesn't mean that they're good people. It doesn't mean that they're coming from the right place. It doesn't mean that their integrity and intentions are to teach or empower people. So I think it's always important to be cautious and to be careful and to be skeptical and to be a critical thinker, and not just about this field, about every field, about your doctors and about your politicians and about the people that are around you. I think it's good to ask questions. I always say if you ask the question why, right? If you ask all the whys, then it makes you wise. So if you don't ask questions, you just accept, then you're not thinking. And it's one of the reasons why that during like this period of time now, when I'm lecturing and I'm on social media, people will hear me target the word empath, because I've been doing this for so damn long that I've been through all the words, like the words that make it into the zeitgeist or the lexicon of the paranormal. And right now the word empath is having like a surge, and everybody's like, I'm an empath. And I always say, you may not want to say that. And they'll be like, well, why not? And I said, because if you're being an empath, what you're basically saying is, I'm feeling everybody else's feelings. And if you're feeling everybody else's feelings, then you might not be able to feel yours. So you could be empathetic and the world needs more empathy, but you could be sensitive, you could be intuitive, you could absolutely be psychic, but don't say you're an empath, because being an empath means that you're being risotto. So if you make seafood with risotto, you got seafood risotto. If you make chicken with risotto, you've got chicken risotto. And I don't think we need to be risotto. We need to be individual. So I think it's important to always be aware of our feelings. So being skeptical is important. And skepticism just means I'm questioning. Nothing wrong with that.
And you're right. In today's world, we do need to ask questions. I love that wise thing. That is, I will use that. Why you? Why do you believe you've been given this gift?
So 2 things. One, I always remove the word gift, and I say that one of the things I like to put in there is the ability. And I think that we all have the ability. And as soon as somebody uses the word gift, it implies one's more special than the other. I'm not more special than anybody. I've just been working at this for a really, really long time. And I've been able to cultivate my abilities, evolve and grow and empower myself so I could do that for other people. The why I think is really simple. And it's the same answer that I gave Oprah when I did her show. Because I think by nature of who I am, I'm a teacher. Like my personality, if you looked at my astrological chart, I am an educator. I'm a teacher. So when I worked at the deli and I lied about my age and I got the job washing dishes and 6 months later was the night manager, I wound up training people in the deli field that were hired from school. When that place closed and I managed the video store, I wound up training people there as well. No matter what I did, no matter what job I held, whether it was at the hospital or even in this field, I'm a teacher. So I feel like I'm not just going to read somebody and try to like wow them. I'm going to read them and I'm going to try to educate them. I'm going to read them. I'm going to try to inspire and empower them with information to make better choices so that they don't need a me because they've got themselves to rely on. And I think that's the important part of the why me.
Interesting. Did you always get along with teachers?
I did, actually. I used to read my teachers. I used to get out of gym by doing readings. I hated going to gym class and having to change in the middle of the afternoon. I just thought that was like such a stupid annoyance. So I used to get notes. So my other teachers would get me out of gym class and I would read for them.
Wow. Gay boys had trouble changing and, not wanting to change in high school and, grammar school for gym. I didn't know straight people had problems too.
I didn't like the concept of like, I have to go change.
Breaking up the day.
It was just like I didn't like that. I had a lot of I don't like things energy wise that I didn't understand until I got older in this field. Like I didn't understand why there would be moments where when I would like go to the doctor's office and I would be like sitting around people, I didn't understand why I would feel this like yuck vibration coming from some people. I now refer to it as smelly energy, but it's like certain people have really smelly energy. And a lot of the energy that you can encounter in school is toxic, right? So like I remember that same feeling that I didn't want to change in gym would be when I was away on a school trip and we all had to go do something and I didn't want to do it. And I didn't know why I didn't want to do it. But then the not wanting to do it turned out to be, there was a reason why I didn't want to do it. So there was always an underlying something energetic behind the reasons I had these oppositions. And what it taught me was to find ways out of having to do what maybe you're supposed to do, to get me to think outside the box.
Yeah, absolutely. Doing readings in high school, how old were you and when you did your first reading, and do you remember that first reading?
So I'm going to say I was 15 when I embarked on like the actual, now I'm going to do this. So after I read every book in the library, I then went to the local books.
Let me interrupt you. That, at 15, that is a big undertaking.
Yeah.
Yeah. I don't know that today at 56, I would understand what I was reading in those books that talk about this energy and, and the psychic world. I don't know that I would understand it all. And that's impressive.
Thank you. I didn't really think about it. I just
years old.
Yeah. I was a mature 15. Like I was like 25 at 15, to be honest. I felt like a lot of school was like, again, like not wanting to change was like, this is an annoyance. Like, why are we doing this? Like, and don't talk to me like that. Don't like, I had that whole kind of, I don't want to say an attitude, but it was a little bit of an attitude now, hindsight.
But you know what I do think, when we as students or as a young person are interested, like something, you do focus, and you were definitely
inspired.
Inspired to learn.
Inspired. So after I got through with the library books, I went to the local Walden Books, which was like the bookstore, like the closest shopping center. And again, back shelf, like 2 shelves of books. And what I remember about this experience was the shelves were on like in Manhattan, there was a building that was the Pan Am building. Mm-hmm. And it's got that kind of curvature to it. That's how the shelf was in the bookstore. And there was a deck of tarot cards that was on the shelf. And it was only me in the store. And the manager of the store was in the middle of the store doing something on a middle shelf. And a deck of tarot cards fell off the shelf right in front of me. And I was not touching it. I was like 3 feet away. And I was like, whoa. And the manager goes, clearly you're supposed to buy those. So I did. And it was called Tarot Classic. It was the classic tarot deck. And I went home and I kind of like looked at the cards, and they come with a little booklet. I bought another book on tarot. And because I lived at my grandmother's house and there were constant flows of people coming in and out.
Yeah.
My grandma had 11 kids. Those kids had kids. Those kids had kids. And Sundays at my grandma's house it was pretty robust. So my cousin Florence came, and I read for her. And a week later, she called me and said, are you going to be at grandma's house? And I go, I live here, so sure. She said, can you do my cards again? And I was like, I just did it last week. And she goes, yeah. She goes, but everything you said happened. I was like, Florence, please do not listen to me. I'm like reading out of a pamphlet and like trying to apply it to your life. And she said, well, guess what? She goes, the stuff that you talked about, you couldn't have known. She goes, it was true. And it's kind of happened. And can I bring 5 friends? Can you read for 5 friends? That's how it started. It was like by doing readings like that. And then it was like that old commercial. Was it the Clairol or the and they told 2 friends.
Right. Yeah, I think it was Wella Balsam. Wella. Yeah.
It was like they told 2 friends and so on. That's literally how it started. And I had at that time, I like a lot of validation. Like I have a geeky science mind. So like I like things to be backed up. So I went to 2 other psychics besides this woman, Lydia, and the 2 other psychics backed up what she said, and they didn't know each other. So that 3 separate psychics all tell me the same thing about my path, my future, what I was doing. But I still was like, clearly, I'm in high school. I'm going to go to college. I went to college, and then I went for what we discussed. But I remember on the journey of doing this, like it was just the exploration into an aspect of who you are. And I think for anybody watching or listening, I don't think it really matters what that is. I think it's a really cool thing for all of us to do. Like so many people externalize their desires. They look outside of themselves to try to figure out who they are. And this was an internalized exploration. And I think that internal exploration for me was really, really important and helped me to develop my sensibilities of who I am as a person, what I would do, what I wouldn't do, what I would allow, what I wouldn't allow, and how I feel about things.
It's incredible. The tarot cards, was that sort of how you did it at the beginning? Just because you had it in.
Yeah, that was my uncle at the time was married to a woman who read cards. Ironically, it was like in my family, and she never wanted to do it. She would always come up with excuses. Like they'd be like, Debbie, will you read the? No, I've got a headache. Debbie, no, I've got a headache. And I'd be like, why don't you want to do it? And she said, because I get a headache when I'm done. She's like, I just don't, she's like, everybody always wants me to do it. And I'm like, oh, interesting. But then I realized later on, it's like, she wasn't protecting her energy, which is why she was vulnerable to negative, like kind of experiences where she was getting drained and she was getting headaches, and she was wickedly accurate with what she did with her cards. And she read with a regular deck of Spanish playing cards. She didn't read with like tarot. The tarot was a 78 deck of cards that has an illustrated minor. So there's pictures on it. And these pictures elicit a feeling when you look at them. You don't have to be psychic. You don't have to look at a book. If I show you a card, you're going to say, oh, that makes me feel this way. So for you, that card would represent that for you. And then you could learn about what the historical meaning and the origins would be. When you put those together, they're now giving us an understanding of the archetype of the human experience and condition. So people think about tarot as being like a predictive tool, and it can be, but it's more about an understanding tool about the lessons that we're here to learn, where we are right now, what's coming up for us, what's been the trajectory from the past on a line of probability. And it's really about, what am I supposed to learn? And anything metaphysical has to come from that spot for me professionally. If somebody's doing this work from a professional standpoint, it's got to be about, what's the lesson? Like, what am I supposed to learn from this? How can I prepare for what's coming up next with where I'm at today?
It's fascinating. Speaking of the Oprah Winfrey interview, I love when she asks you, where are all these people you're talking to from the other side? And I loved your answer because
I didn't remember what my answer was, to be honest, but I could tell you that what I could say now is that I use the internet as the example.
that's what you used, and it's a brilliant answer because I think it helps all of us understand.
Right. It's something it's an invisible dimension and a realm that we can't access physically, but we can consciously. And we can tap into that when we have our own device. So when we are the device that accesses the internet, we can access whatever, pages you want to go to. So when we talk about the spirit world, or we talk about this other dimension energetically, we can access that with meditation and prayer and focus, understanding, and then we can make our own direct connections. And that's what basically I'm doing. And I always tell people that we are tethered to those that we love, and we're tethered to those that we've loved and lost physically. But energetically, there's a survival of consciousness.
Speaking of those we loved, you and I have another connection. Your mom and mine both lost our lives to that damn word cancer and lung cancer.
Yes.
Which, you lost your mom really young, and I'm really, I did too, but you were much younger. It really sucks, and cancer does suck. But you and your mom had the conversation before her passing about this world, the afterlife, and sending you a connection. Can you talk about that? Because
So just to rewind a little bit more, I started focusing more at 3:00 when I came home from school. My grandmother had 2 TVs going on simultaneously, so she would sit in between 2 separate rooms. One was Channel 4, Another World in New York. The other one was Guiding Light. Guiding Light, I kind of resonated more with. So I would watch, all the machinations of the Bowers and the Reardons and the Spaldings and all of that. So I had that as a frame of reference for years. And I would always talk to my mom about the patterns in television that I used to see. And I wanted to know, as a kid, how did the TV people know? And she would say, how did the TV people know what? And I'd go, how did they know that I was going to be watching at that moment? And she would say to me, I don't know what you mean. And I'd be like, well, it's like the TV's talking directly to me. At which point she said, how is the TV talking to you? And I know at the moment she's probably thinking, like, my son's schizophrenic, psychiatrist, like the TV's talking to him. And I was like, I could be watching something on this show, and then that same exact thing gets covered on that show. So I was at a very young age seeing patterns literally on television. I was like and they weren't coincidences, because they were really, really, it happened a lot. And my mom never really believed me. She didn't really she says, oh, you have got a vivid imagination. That was always the thing. Like, you have a vivid imagination. So in 7th grade, when my 7th grade English teacher started us to read Daphne du Maurier's Rebecca, I said to my Aunt Roseanne, who lived in the house with me, I was like, I think you're going to like this book. You should read it with me. So now she's reading the book with me. Simultaneously, Guiding Light wrote into the storyline Rebecca with Nola, played by the late Lisa Brown, and Michael Tylo, right?
Yeah.
So it was like Nola and Quentin, right?
Yeah.
So the two of them had this, Mrs. Renfield and Rebecca's written in. And my aunt turned around and she looked at me and she goes, do you find this odd that this classic book that we're now reading is on the show that we're watching every day? And I went, me? Not a bit. I go, not at all. I feel like I've been doing this my entire life. She's like, Johnny, it's almost like the TV's talking to us. And I go, tell your sister that so she doesn't think that I'm crazy, right? So it became like a thing from 7th grade now, right? When I was working at the deli, my aunt also worked at the deli, and my mom came. We were working one night, and it was when Reva, the character played by Kim Zimmer, jumped off the bridge.
Mm-hmm.
Barbara Streisand.
Yeah.
Etched in my brain. My mom called me because she knew that we had, recorded it, and I was working from like 3:00 on, so I didn't see that episode. So we're sitting in the deli, and she's telling my aunt and myself over the phone that, Reba jumped off the bridge. And we were like, she jumped off a bridge? And the people that were standing there were like, oh my God, somebody jumped off a bridge. And it was like this whole thing. So there was a tie-in between my mother, my aunt, my grandmother, me. It was always like in the circle of almost used as a tool. Like the tarot was used as a tool. This was like used as a theme or a tool. So then when my mom was diagnosed with cancer and it became very clear that she was not going to win that battle, we had hospice come. And ironically, hospice came every day at 3:00. So every day at 3:00, I would say, I'll see you later. I'm going to Springfield. And for that hour, I escaped cancer. For that hour, that became my family. Like there was no cancer. And I think it was like July of 1989, if I remember correctly, and I could be off, but I'm pretty positive that Kim, who was my favorite character of Reva, like drove herself off the show on a bridge.
Yeah, it was definitely summer.
And I just remember thinking like, you've got to be kidding me right now. It's like my mom's dying and now I'm dealing with like my favorite characters like going off a bridge. And it was this like, again, almost like having to navigate the loss of something that you're connected to while I was dealing with that. But Guiding Light in Springfield became a big deal. So much so that before my mom passed, I said to her, when you get there, I just need you to do me a favor. And I came up with 3 things. One was kind of hard. One was like medium. One was easy. One was her name. One was something else that had to do with my childhood with a stuffed animal. But the other one was, I want you to take me to Springfield. I said, I want you to get me to Springfield. I go, so when I go for a reading, I want you to either bring up, you're probably not going to get the person to say Guiding Light. I go, so bring up like Springfield. Like it could be Illinois, it could be Massachusetts, it could be Springs and Fields. But then like if the medium can't get it, show them the symbols of like springs and fields. And I kind of tried to cover it that way. So she's like, if I can do it, I'll do it. If I can do it, I'll do it. And I was positive she could do it. Totally positive. So long story, she passed in October of 1989. And I was waiting for it to happen. And it didn't happen immediately. It didn't happen right away. But I remember having a reading with a British medium. Her name is Linda Williamson. And Linda Williamson wrote a book called Contacting the Spirit World. And she's in the UK. So the book somehow finds itself to me. I read the book and I resonate with the way the woman wrote. And I resonated with the reading style because I'm kind of surgical when I read. I'm very direct. There's not a lot of ornate language. It's kind of like, here's what I'm getting, here's what I'm seeing, here's what I'm feeling. And she kind of wrote like that. And I thought, I want her to read me because she's out of the country and there's no way she would know anything about me. And I wanted to protect the experience and my own sense of skepticism and all of that. So I went to my editor of my first book one last time. Her name is Denise. And I'm sitting in Denise's office and she's on the phone. And I said, I need you to help me locate the phone number for a psychic in the UK. And she went, okay, why? I was like, well, I want somebody that's going to read for me that doesn't really know me. I go, it's a book called Contacting the Spirit World, and it's by Linda Williamson. And Denise looked at me, and then she just kind of like slowly looked to her left. So I followed her to her shelf where there were 12 books by Linda there. And I went, why do you have 12 copies of this book that I just came in asking about the author? She goes, I'm her US publisher. And I went, oh, you know her? She goes, I do. She gave me her phone number, author to author. I wasn't as worldly back then. I didn't realize the time difference and the time change.
Oh, shit.
Yeah. So at like 9 p.m. on a Friday night in New York, I called Linda.
Oh, God.
Is it 3 a.m. in the UK? God bless this woman. She answered the phone and engaged me, professionally, probably because of Denise. And I said, I would love to have a phone reading with you. And she said in a very beautiful accent, oh, I'm so sorry, love. I don't do those. And I remember going, what do you mean you don't do those? She goes, I don't do phone readings. I was like, what do you mean you don't do phone readings? She says, if you're ever in London, ring me up and we'll do that. And then I was like determined I wasn't letting her off the phone until she agreed. And I got her to agree to read me. So she did a phone reading for me. And I know like a version of shorthand speed writing, like long story, but I know how to do that. And it was like, I think, training for me with my work. And I switched into speed writing because the reading that she gave was very flowery, ornate, and not like the book that she wrote. So I kind of tuned out, like, and I just went into like, I'm taking a class and I'm just going to write down word for word what she said. And she got my mom, and she got some great information about my mom. And then she said, your mom is telling me that she's your guiding light. And I missed it. I completely missed it. Like the 2 words.
Until you reread your notes?
No, my mom got annoyed. I think my mom got annoyed because the woman said, oh dear. And she paused. She goes, your mom wants me to tell you again. She paused again. And she dropped her voice a little bit. And she went, guiding light. And I couldn't speak after that. I was legitimately like, it just, like, to hear those two words was such a powerful validation. And then subsequently, years later, she like outdid herself when I was asked by a friend of mine if I would do a reading for a friend of hers in the city. And I did. And I remember when I got to the person's office, I sat in his office and I gave my big explanation. I was about ready to read, and then his phone went off, and he had an issue. And then he said, I have a work thing. Come with me. And I was like, no, I'll be here. I'll wait till you come back. And he looked at me and he's like, no, come with me. And then I realized, listen, dumbass, you're a psychic who's about ready to read this guy. He's not going to leave you in his office. You have to protect the integrity of his experience. Take the walk. So I followed him through an office into an open hallway area, and there was an air wall. He walked through the air wall. I followed him through the air wall onto the set of Company. And it was the bar Company. And I let out a holy shit. And the person,
wait, so who were you reading?
So the person turned around and said, wait, you watch my show? And I looked at him and I went, yes. What do you do? He goes, I'm the casting director. And I went, no, you're not. Betty Ray is the casting director.
Was it Jimmy Bohr?
No, it was Glenn.
Glenn Daniels.
Yeah.
Wow, I cannot believe I've never heard this story.
Yeah.
Wow. You didn't know that? You were in, so I assume, were you 222 East 44th for that?
It was like on the 17th floor of some building or something. It was like, I don't know where I was in. I was in an office building. There was nothing that even remotely made me feel like I was in like a TV studio. Like, to me, I felt like it was like, it could have been an accounting office, until I walked through the air walls. When I walked through the air wall, and I just had that moment of like, I mean, she took me to Springfield. She legitimately took me to Springfield.
Wow.
And then we met, where we actually went on my show. I got the chance to return to Springfield.
We brought your show to Springfield, basically. Yeah. Wow. Was it the Crossing Over book that you shared the story, the first reading with the British woman? Because that's where I feel like I read it.
Yeah, it might have been in that, because in the first book, One Last Time, I ended it by saying, and that came out in 1998. I ended my book by saying, I am a professional medium and I still haven't gotten the signs that I'm looking for. And then it was right after that, when that book came out, because it was that publisher, my editor of that book, who introduced me to Linda, and that's how it all started. And then I sat back and thought, like, wow, maybe if that book came out sooner, like, it all would have happened sooner. Because I felt like I needed to end that first book with, like, it's not always about what we want, it's about what we need. And after I personally released the fact that, it's almost a decade that she was gone and I hadn't gotten that, but I recognized I didn't need it. Like, I wanted it, but I didn't need it, because I knew that there was a survival of consciousness just on my clientele alone, reading for strangers. People have said, like, what helped you with your grief? Being a medium, connecting directly with your mom? I was like, no, the exact opposite. Being a medium and connecting with my clients' families, where I had complete objectivity, and just time in and time again seeing the validations that if it could happen for them, it was happening for me.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's fascinating. I mean, because I did experience it, watching you do what you do on the set of Guiding Light with Beth Ehlers and Marge Doucet and Crystal Chappelle, who were all there. And I used to work on Regis and Kathy Lee many years ago, and I think Shar had come.
Yeah.
And I have seen people in my career do it, where I absolutely know they do not, have any connection to these people that they have just read. And I don't know where my beliefs completely are, but I have a friend that I sort of met through doing this show who lost her 14-year-old son and father to a neo-Nazi who wanted to know what it felt like to kill Jewish people, and ended up killing 3 non-Jewish people. And she is a very religious person who has incredible faith and talks about the signs that she gets from her beautiful son, Reed, and from her dad. And I have full faith that she sees them. And just over, I'd say weirdly so, over the last even year, maybe 2 years. And recently my sister and I were in the car together going to a funeral of a friend of mine from growing up. His dad passed away, and we were going to the funeral because my mom was very close to them and to the mom. And afterwards we were going to go, because we were near where I grew up, and we were going to go to my mother's best friend. And my sister and I sitting in the car about to call her to see if she was home, and the numbers 642 were on the clock, and 642 is my mother's address.
Oh.
Growing up. And I feel like that just every time me and my sister now are together or something, that 642 appears. And I don't know what it means, but I like to have that belief that it's some connection.
Well, first of all, I'm so blown away by the fact that you shared the story about your friend. And I think what a horrible experience for any person to have to navigate. And there's no greater loss on the planet than the loss of a child. And to hear that she's navigated that with the grace of faith is probably one of the most inspirational things that anybody watching this right now can take away. And she's not even on here, but just the reality that a parent can find grace and faith to enable that connection. I talk about the story publicly. I did a 3-person event, probably in 1996, maybe. And it was myself, this other psychic, Shelley Peck, and the late Sylvia Brown. And I remember my friend Shelley reading for a woman, and it was here on Long Island. And the woman was all the way to the right of the stage. And I don't have a poker face. So if you want to know what I'm thinking, you pretty much just have to look at me. And I'm on the stage, Shelley's doing the reading. And if Shelley was over here, diagonal, the woman was looking the opposite direction. And she was just kind of smiling, listening to Shelley, but smiling. And I remember watching the woman, and the woman's son had died, and the woman's son was coming through, and it was a very tragic passing. And the more information Shelley was bringing through for this woman with her son, the more emotional I was feeling watching it and trying to keep my composure. And the more loving the woman was getting. It was almost like she was glowing. And for a little bit of a millisecond, I was like, she's got to be on drugs right now. She's got to be something's making her okay with this. And then it wasn't just me, because Shelley said to the woman, she's like, ma'am, how are you able to be like this? And she smiled, and then she turned to Shelley, and with laser precision, she said, because that's my son. Done. The rest of the room was flat out done, because the level of command and control of her energy and her voice when she said that gave a clarity that this woman already had a connection through her grace and faith that her son was still with her. And Shelley was just basically validating what she knew, which is why she was smiling. It's a powerful moment. And I think grief is a powerful emotion. And I think when we talk about tying it back into something where you watch a show like Guiding Light, or you become part of a family, or you're connected to something that's got heritage and legacy, where anybody who's a Guiding Light fan, you say Burt Bauer, and they go, oh, because you've got decades of watching that matriarch of a family, and you have gone through your milestones. I do feel like that you have this connection. And what's really funny is, as a kid, I would meet people, that were on the show, or as a young adult, and I would say, oh my God, I watched you with my grandma, and I knew that was an endearing term. And now I'm getting it. Like, I'm getting it from people where they're like, oh my God, I watched you with my grandmother. And I'm like, oh, I don't like the way this feels. Like, I feel like I have a ton of apology letters I need to write. So
totally.
It comes full circle. That's that same feeling. But
that is a great, yeah, I love that. And to go back to Mindy Corporon, that's her name. And I love that you just even acknowledged her story. She really has inspired me in so many ways. She's before I actually met her doing the show, I remembered this killing in Overland Park, Kansas, as someone who's Jewish. I remember because also the night that they were killed, she got up and spoke at the vigil, and it was all over the news. And finding the courage and strength and grace to do that in, as you said, the hardest thing in the world, to lose a child. And she really is an inspiring person. Talk about, speaking of all of this, talk about the responsibility you feel in doing this work. People are putting their faith, money, hope into time with you to connect with their loved ones. And that's got to put some level of pressure on you.
Yeah, it should. And it has to, for anybody that's going to carry the moniker of doing this work, right? If you're a metaphysical practitioner, I don't care if you're doing astrology, numerology, tarot, Reiki, any type of metaphysical energy work for someone, you do carry that responsibility of having to, I think, be a certain way or present a certain way. So from a young age, I've actually always had that. Like, once I got past the ego version of me, like, hey, look what I can do, like, and the reality of the responsibility of what this is kicked in, I always took it seriously, and sometimes too serious. Like, when I was working at a hospital and they found out that I did this, I was working as a phlebotomist, and some of the folks came to watch me do a group. And when they watched the group, they laughed a good way through it. Like, they were laughing. And I remember thinking they were laughing at me. And I knew that I was going to be seeing these people at work every day. And I felt like they were not being respectful to the losses of the people that were in front of me. So long story short, one of the people said to me, like, the following day or so after, the group, that was amazing. And I couldn't control my tongue. I said, really? Because you laughed through the entire thing. I didn't think that you would find, dead relatives of people in grief funny. And the person saw that my reaction was not what they expected. And they went, whoa, 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 whoa. John, we didn't know those people. We don't know anything about those people. And whether you want to acknowledge this or not, you're funny. Like, you were funny. I'm like, funny? And he goes, well, you're sarcastic, and your sarcasm was funny. And as a result of that, it made us interested and we were entertained. So we learned through that. And he said to me, he goes, maybe know that's a good thing, and maybe don't take yourself so seriously. And I had to process that. I had to work on that, because to me, it was like, we're talking like going back to like starting this in 1985. And when I did Crossing Over, I really wasn't allowed to use the word psychic. Like,
I heard you say that in an interview. I was blown away.
Yeah, like, it wasn't like we couldn't say psychic in advertising and stuff. So there was a lot of implied kind of, like, they did a whole big campaign for the show, and it was like, sometimes you need to know. And I'm like, what? If you want to put that, like, you want to put that next to Oprah's face, then great. You want to put that next to the local newscaster's face. Awesome. But if you have no idea who the hell I am and what I do, sometimes you need to know is such an ambiguous mismarketing strategy, you know? So anyway, there was a lot of stuff that I, was
Fascinating that you couldn't use that. But I want to go back to something you just said about the ego. Because I guess learning that at such a young age that you have this ability,
Yep.
I can see that, being like, hey, I'm cool and I've got this. Was there that moment? Do you remember? Was it a reading? Was it someone that, where you took it more seriously?
Knocked it out of me. And yeah, I can tell you exactly the moment. So I would say I had a few years of some psychic swagger going on. I was like the wonder kid.
Swagger. I love it.
Yeah. Definitely had some psychic swagger going on. I was some little cocky arrogance because I was very accurate. So people,
and you were young. I mean, coming into anything at a young age, whatever it is, psychic, an actor gaining success is going to have swagger.
And I had it. And then I had it ripped away from me in one night. And it was a day that I was in a car with my friend. We were driving to the local mall. He was driving, I was a passenger, and he said, and I quote, "What are you doing this weekend?" And I went, "What am I doing this weekend? I'm doing this weekend what I do every weekend. I'll be doing readings and talking to people's dead relatives. While you're out partying and doing like our age kinds of things, I'll be sitting on the floor of either my living room or somebody else's living room doing a group reading, talking to, how many ever energies are going to come through." And he's like, "Yeah, but that's cool." I was like, "Yeah." I go, "But it's not like, it's not like a normal teenage experience. And sometimes I'd like to just be normal." That was kind of like my vibe. So that night, there were 11 people that came to my grandmother's house and sat on my couch. And I gave my big explanation. I said, "Any questions?" And they said no. And nothing happened. Nothing happened. Now, if it was a one-on-one reading, I could say off day, I wasn't connecting. Not with 11 people. With 11 people, if each person came with one or two other energies, I'm looking at like 22 energies that could have been coming through. Somebody was going to be loud enough to get my attention. And I sat there for like 15 minutes of silence. Now, the people sitting on the couch had no idea. Is that normal? Is it not normal? Do we sit here for a half hour and wait till something shows up? But for me, it wasn't normal at all. So I was like sitting there on the floor going, what the hell? Like, what's going on? And then they flashed the scene of me in the car complaining that I wanted to be normal, that I just wanted to have a normal teenage experience. And it was in that moment that I recognized what they say on social media. It was in that moment he knew that he effed up. It was in that moment that I realized, oh my God, this is not about me. Like, I can't do this. I can't do this. This has to happen through me, but I'm not doing this. And it wasn't until I humbled myself and I apologized in that moment that group happened. And in that moment, it never shifted. It never shifted again because I recognized the responsibility that I have to show up as a piano that's in tune. And whoever's going to play me is going to play me, but I'm not the piano player. I'm just the piano. So I recognized and was humbled greatly that day. And I never looked back from that moment. So that is the thing. If anybody is a metaphysical practitioner or somebody starting out and they're wanting to know what to do, is keep your ego in check, because it's not about you. It's got to be about you being in tune, and it's got to be about the client.
I love that. There was a question. Do you think the place we cross over to occupies the gravity force astrophysicists call dark matter?
I don't know. I don't know. I think that the other side is an overlay to the world that we exist in. Parallel universe on some level, but one that they're able to connect with and to and through. And there's not a lot that I could say that I know about the afterlife in the sense of here's what it's like, because I can't validate that. So I always tell people, I'm not gonna lecture or write about things where I'm subjectively wondering. I don't want to do that. I take what I do too seriously. So I'll tell you what my experiences are. And I go to my go-to always is Australia. For the last 2 decades, I've traveled and lectured and seen the country, which is amazing. And I can tell you what I've seen. I can tell you where I've been. I can tell you my experiences, what I've eaten, who I've met. But I can't write the history or the tour book to Australia. And that's what it feels like for me when like a publisher says, write the book to the afterlife. I go, I can't. I can only tell you about my experiences accessing that for the 4 decades that I've done that. And I don't want the responsibility of it. Like, I don't want the responsibility of saying like, here's what it's like. It's not my thing.
Speaking of Australia, I saw an interview you did, really how much you love that country. And you love, I would almost describe it as a civility of that country.
I do. In
comparison to what we are living through here as citizens of our own United States. I loved how you articulated that, and how we need to do better here. I really did love how you.
It's a very weird experience. It's a very weird experience when you're born and raised as an American and you are America and you appreciate the country and the values that you've been raised learning, and you have the word united in your title, and you have a patriotism because your dad was in the military and you were taught a level of commanding respect. I tell a story that as a kid with my powers, I took an American flag that my dad had given me that had a pointed golden tip on it. And I used to wrap the flag around it. And then I would use it as a spear and throw it. And in front of the entirety of my mom's family one Sunday at my grandmother's house, I got ripped a new one about what the flag means and the level of respect that you have to have for the 3 colors and the stars and the lives that were lost. So when I make a statement like you heard me make about Australia, that's the place that it's coming from. So just to be clear, but after 2 decades of being there, the level of unity that they have within the community of a country that's so big, it's really, really cool. So here's the analogy that I share. I woke up in Melbourne, Australia 1 year, and I wasn't doing any media. But I woke up and I turned the television on, and the Today Show started having a conversation about John Edward being in the country. So I had this moment where I was like, somebody else got my name. And then the person answered and said, yeah, it doesn't matter if you believe or not. Some people they get really like helped by what is it he's doing. And I'm like sitting in my bed watching the show going, the Today Show in a different country is talking about the fact that I'm here. And that they knew that I was touring. And I was like, I could never imagine like waking up in the States and like having like Matt Lauer at the time, turned into Katie Couric. It was like, John Edwards in Seattle, he's touring Washington. He's out in the Pacific Northwest, just not going to happen. And then I started paying attention. And I noticed like if I wasn't going to a certain territory or an area, those folks would like send emails and say, hey, we're not going to get a chance to experience you, but we hope that you love the country. Have an amazing whatever and blah, blah, blah. Like they know if Fleetwood Mac or U2 or Pink is touring in one like area, but not another, the entirety of the country is connected to what's happening. And they care. And I'm like, you guys don't understand. Like, if U2 is touring Miami, nobody in Seattle really cares. Like, it's just
that's amazing. And it takes me to gun violence because they have it under control, and the unity. I'm not getting political, but the unity with the vaccine was, they had the lowest like numbers in the world, basically.
New Zealand, I think, did more so. Yeah.
I think Zealand and not Australia.
Yeah, I think Australia had their own sense of, but let's tie this back into the energetic thing, right? So you just said, I don't want to get political. And it's really, really interesting because health isn't political. Health isn't political. Humanity shouldn't be political. But we're living at a time, and I think the astrologers, you could probably have the astrologers come on and better speak to this because I listen to what they say. the astrologers will talk about the divisive energy cosmically that we're all going through. And people will it doesn't matter where you're landing on what side of what color or what's better chocolate or to vaccine or not vaccine or who's your favorite sports team. If the energy is already giving you a divided vibe, right, then that makes people choose, right? So people are choosing sides. And ultimately, you know, in my little energetic anthropological way of looking at it, it's because technology came out. And as soon as technology came out, technology made everybody their own news station, and it gave everybody their own voice, and it gave everybody the ability to put out there. And that has positive and negative, right? So one of the downsides, I think, in a societal, global society is that everybody is their own journalist and they could be that civilian journalist. And now they have that sense of self. Well, what if that person's not coming from a place of being informed? What if that person's not taking the time to be an ethical, informed person? What if somebody's got implicit bias or prejudice or big? Now we're into the, you know, creating echo chambers where now they're going to side with people of, and you could see that in any sports team, you know, this team or that team, right? And it's easy and it's okay. And it's acceptable when you're talking about competitive rivalries when it's in sports, because it's a game and those people being paid millions and millions of dollars to play. And, you know, it's fun and it's collective and we all kind of come together for the Super Bowl to whatever the reason might be. But when you're talking about people's lives, you can't have teams. When you're talking about society and humanity, you can't have teams. There's only one team. So there's either the team that's for humanity or there's the team that's against it. And that is not political. That's factual. So I always tell people, like, you don't need to know what anybody's personal politics are. You just need to see if they're good people. And you know a good person if they're team humanity. And if they're not team humanity, they're going to fail and they will be on the wrong side of history. Now, if people hear that as being political, that's on them.
Please make a t-shirt. I want a t-shirt right now that says Team Humanity. You need to. You need to. I'm going to ask the last question. Benjamin was asking, do you have a spirit guide that helps you today?
Oh my God, we all do. So I will end by saying this. Every single person that comes across this interview, whether it's watching it live or if it's 10 years from now on YouTube, please know that you have a team of energies that work with you. Those teams of energies are there to guide you, give you insights for this lifetime. So you all have your own guiding lights, and they don't have to be grandma in spirit.
John, you're the best. This was really an amazing interview. Thank you so much.
I appreciate the opportunity. It was fun.
Me too. Stay here for just a sec as I sign off. Thanks, everybody, for joining today. Thank you, John Edward, for stopping by. For more information about John and his work, visit johnedward.net. Please join me on Friday when one of the greatest dance artists of all time, Christine W., joins me live to look back at her incredible career in music. If you haven't yet subscribed to my YouTube channel, you can do so down below. Turn on notifications for reminders of all upcoming shows. And if you'd like to stream an audio version, you can search The Locker Room on your favorite streaming platform. Have a great afternoon, and I will see you all on Friday. Thanks, everybody.